Is this good audio? Fantastic. Okay. Hi, yes, my name is Jessica Steve, and I am a biologist with DEC here at the Division of Marine Resources. I'm currently the head of the Marine Permit Office, and today I'm here talking about Long Island's changing commercial fishery, more specifically, a little bit of a look into the human aspect of fisheries management. So my goal for this presentation is really to look at some preliminary information that we already have in-house and what that can maybe tell us about the human side of the people interacting with our commercial fisheries here in the Long Island area. I'm sorry, is there a clicker? So many things. Okay. So first off, a little bit of background and introduction for anyone who's not familiar with commercial fisheries in New York, down here in the marine area where I'm going to be focusing, some of the species that are involved in commercial fisheries, etc. So first off, I'm going to be really sticking with this marine and coastal district down here when we're talking about commercial fishing activity and the permits that we issue at the state level for commercial fisheries. There is some commercial permitting that happens for commercial activity fisheries-wise up in the Hudson River and also a little bit in the Delaware, but for this talk I'm going to really be sticking to the waters around here. I should also say that there is fishing activity that happens outside of this blue zone if people are in other state waters or federal waters and landing here, but we're going to be focusing on the stuff that comes in and lands commercially in Long Island. Also, just a little overview of some, but certainly not all, of the commercially important species down here. So in case you're unfamiliar, of course, we've seen striped bass many times today. We've got fluke, tautog, bluefish, clams and oysters, scallops, mussels, blue crabs, horseshoe crabs, some lobsters still, whelks. These are all some of our major important species and some of our quota managed species by the state. So this is just a really simplified picture of the major players when we talk about the commercial fishing industry and some of the back and forth that happens. So first here in this corner, we've got us, DEC, Division of Marine Resources, and we issue permits to harvesters and to dealers. Harvesters would be the group that you would think of as fishermen, either fishing for fish or shellfish or any of the seafood resources out there. So we have permits for harvesters and for dealers. In return for those, the privilege, those permits, some of them require reports from harvesters and dealers. So harvesters have to give us that information on what are called vessel trip reports, where they have to provide some information about their fishing activity, what they're catching, where they are, the gear they're using, etc. And the same with dealers, they need to report to us what they're purchasing from harvesters, so we have a good idea of the landings for New York State. After that, the fish, shellfish, etc., moves kind of from one group to another here. So harvesters typically sell to dealers. Dealers may sell to restaurants, where then you might go and get a fish at a restaurant or perhaps a grocery store. But the end consumer can also get seafood directly from a fisherman if they want to, or from a dealer in like a market setting. So those are some of the major players, and obviously money is moving back and forth here as well, but I didn't include it here. So the main kernel here that I want to focus on is that fisheries management is people management. So landings can only tell one part of the story, and it's really important to think about the people involved in fishery, what they look like, what may be changing about the people side. The reason why we have fisheries management and commercial industries is because people depend on it, and we want to protect and conserve this resource. So we need to look at the people side. In keeping with our then and now theme for the meeting, I love this picture. This is the wrong thing. Got too many tools. This photo down here is from, I think the 70s or the 80s, and they're like essentially ice clamming out on the Great South Bay. They would go out to the middle of the bay, and it was so frozen over that you could walk out there. They would drive trucks out there and go shell fishing. And then on the right, we have a more modern day photo of a digger, somebody clamming. But it's cool. There's a lot of history of this whole industry here in Long Island. So again, a little bit more detail about who we are and what data we have available. Like I said, I'm from the Division of Marine Resources, part of the Interstate Fisheries Coordination Group, which is made up of 3 main offices. There's the Marine Permit Office, of which I mentioned I'm the head. There's data management, and there's quota management. So in terms of the data we collect, The permit office has our marine permit system, which has all of the information about the permits we issue, the permit holders, and that's goes back to 2000. So we have about a 22-year data set, which is going to be a lot of some of the initial information I'm going to show today. Data management handles that vessel trip report piece that the harvesters are reporting back to us, and quota management gets the dealer information in terms of their purchases. So there are a few major permit sectors, I'll call them, of types of activity that we permit here for commercial activity. There are, again, the harvesters, dealer processors. For hire is that party charter sector. They're not quite commercial, not quite recreational. They're kind of a little bit of their own thing. And we also permit aquaculture and restoration activities, but today I'm really just going to be focusing on these three groups. When we think about commercial fishing, these are the players we're talking about. And I've got kind of a picture here of each, including this photo here, which is a picture from Fulton Fish Market in the city. So it's hard to see, but each of these boxes is full of seafood. So it's a lot that we handle here in terms of commercial landings. So let's get into a few just simple trends, what we can see for this 22-year data set about our permit holders, who are the people who are commercially involved in fisheries here. So for a little bit more context, this is a summary of the 2022 permits that were issued this past year, almost 5,000 permits. You can see I've kind of grouped them into some major categories. So digger permits would be anybody who's wanting to commercially harvest shellfish of any kind. And we've got dealers you see up there, party charter boats, lobster whelk, bait, etc. The ones with the yellow stars are what we call limited entry permits, meaning that we're not currently issuing new permits at this time. The ones that are currently existing out in circulation will continue to do that, but we're not issuing new ones now. And they make up, as of last year, about 40% of the total permits that we issue. And then another thing to see is just that digger permits is by far the largest permit type that we issue, followed closely by those food fish and dealers. So the first thing I looked at was, what if any change in the number of permit holders have we seen over the years? So again, this is coming from our marine permit system, which is that 22 years of data. So a lot of the figures I'm going to show you today are this 22-year time span running along the bottom. So in general, we see kind of a 30% decline overall in the number of participants, again, in those three major sectors that I mentioned, in terms of harvesters, dealers, and party charters. And this is people. So there has been a bit of a decline in the past 20 years in people participating in commercial fishing here. That's partially impacted by the limited entry regulations that we have in place. Like I said, they are limited, we're not issuing new ones. So there was a period of time where we were a little bit regulatory-wise reducing the number of them that were out there. But as of 2018, we hit a kind of a status quo on the number of limited entry ones that are not decreasing anymore. They're holding steady, but we're still kind of seeing a little bit of a decline regardless. And those limited entry permits are only a portion of the overall total included here. On the right, this is new permit holders by year. So these are people coming into commercial fishing for the first time. And I do want to point out the difference in scale here. They look kind of similar, but this is only about 400 as opposed to like thousands. So it's really a small portion of people who are new coming in every year. So this is a figure showing the change over time in the number of permits. So this is permits, not people, which is why the numbers are higher, because a person could have more than one permit or type of permit and therefore fall into more than one of these sectors. And I have it broken up here by sector, those three major ones that I've mentioned, dealer, for hire, and harvester. And you can see that the dealer and for hire sectors are kind of holding steady, and really that decline is coming from a change in harvester type permits. This here is, again, those three sectors broken out. We issue permits to, they're corporate and also individual. So we might issue a permit to a corporation or a business to do business activity, or we might permit an individual. And again, with that limited entry, some of those permits we don't issue to corporations anymore. So a little bit of that is dependent on some of the permit regulations that we currently have. But you can see here that dealers, not necessarily surprisingly, are majority corporations, which which does make sense that there are businesses, there are markets stealing and moving seafood around from harvesters to other sectors. The for-hire permits are kind of 50-50 split, and harvesters are, as I mentioned a little bit because of the limited entry, they're overwhelmingly individual permits. And again, you see where that major decline is really kind of in the harvester sector. And even more interestingly, the for-hire is kind of holding steady and not necessarily declining, which is, I thought it was interesting. So the next thing I looked at was, is there any change in some of the gender ratios in this 20-year time span that we have? So if you look at this figure on the left, this is showing the proportion of men versus women holding permits over time. And it's not a lot, but you might see a little bit of growth in the number of women in fisheries and think, oh, we're gaining women in fisheries. But if you look at the figure on the right, you'll see that really the number of women holding permits is actually pretty constant, and we're really just losing men in the fishery over time, and that's why it looks like proportionally we have more women, but it's really just that there are fewer men. This figure shows the change in average age for individuals with commercial permits. So in the past 20 years, it's gone from an average age of about 45, 46 to all the way up to about 55, 56 being the average age. So past 20 years, our fishers are definitely aging, and this would also indicate that there are not many younger people coming in to offset the natural aging that happens with everybody. So they're getting older, and there aren't really a lot of younger people coming into this industry. This last figure here shows the number of trips reported by year. So this information is coming from the vessel trip report data that I mentioned, and it's a slightly different time span, only the past decade or so, where we have the most robust harvester data. And it's not necessarily surprising that there is kind of a seasonal fluctuation in the number of trips that fishers are taking. Of course, summer is when things are most active here in terms of fisheries, with a little bit of bump in the fall. But I think it is interesting to note that even though we are seeing some of these declines, the years are still pretty tight together. So the fishers who are fishing and active are kind of staying in the same, they're taking the same number of trips, with similar effort from year to year. And even 2020, I know the colors are a little hard to see, but even 2020 is this lowest line here, which was obviously a wild year, but it still wasn't as terrible as it could have been. I guess it's kind of along the trend of the other years in terms of number of trips that fishers are taking. So, in conclusion, generally, it seems like our participants in the commercial fishing industry are male, they're getting older, and their numbers are in general declining. So it's important to think about these potential changes in the human side of the permitting that we do, the fishing activity that's happening, and how that might impact fisheries management decisions going forward. You know, fisheries management is more than just the fish, it's more than just the ecosystem changes or climate changes that might be happening. There also could be changes to the people side of it. And just wanted to present this information and kind of think about some of those social or demographic changes and maybe have a jumping off point for more questions looking into more information like this in the future. This is really just scratching the surface, but and that is all I have today. So thank you very much for your time. I know it's been a really long day. Here's my contact information, and I do want to give a little shout out to my colleague, Melissa Albino-Hegeman, who did help me a lot with putting this presentation together. She's the one who handles that vessel trip report data that I mentioned earlier, so if you have any questions related to that, you can definitely reach out to her directly, or you can ask me now. So thank you for your time.